Most racing legends leave behind trophies and framed photos. Richard Petty locked his away where nobody could find them. Somewhere in Level Cross, North Carolina, behind a garage door that almost never opens, sits a collection worth tens of millions of dollars that the public has never seen. The man they call the King of NASCAR built his name on 200 career wins and 7 championships. But what he chose to hide tells a different story than what he chose to celebrate. This garage holds the original number 43 Plymouth Superbird, still covered in track debris from its last race. The crude 1957 Oldsmobile he built with his father before anyone knew his name, and a locked room containing artifacts from the crash that nearly killed him. The cars alone could fetch millions at auction, yet Petty refuses every offer. Understanding why requires looking past the cowboy hat and sunglasses to see what motorsport actually costs when you live it for decades. Richard Petty dominated stock car racing in ways that statistics alone can't capture. Those 200 NASCAR victories stand as a record that modern drivers consider untouchable, and his 7 Cup Series championships tied him with legends in an era when survival itself was an achievement. Auto racing in the 1960s and 70s meant risking your life every time you strapped in, and Petty did it while transforming the sport from regional entertainment into a national obsession. Petty Enterprises, the family racing operation his father Lee Petty founded, became the most successful team in NASCAR history through a combination of mechanical innovation and fearless driving. After retiring from competition, Petty launched Petty's Garage, a custom automobile shop that continues building high-performance vehicles, but that's the public-facing business. The original garage where championship cars were born remains largely hidden, accessible only to family members and a few trusted crew chiefs who helped build his legacy one wrench turn at a time. Walking into that space feels like stepping through a museum that nobody curated. Tools still hang exactly where mechanics left them decades ago, and old tires marked with lap times in grease pencil line the walls, as if waiting for another race day that will never come. Most visitors to the Petty compound never glimpse this room because it stays off limits during tours, and even current employees at Petty's Garage have never crossed that threshold. Petty treats this garage not as a celebration of his championship years, but as a personal archive of everything it took to achieve them. The Plymouth Superbird sits unrestored with tire debris still clinging to its undercarriage and the faint smell of burned oil hanging in the air from races run 40 years ago. Next to it rests the 1957 Oldsmobile that represents his beginning, crude and rusted but beautiful for what it started. Few people knew this car still existed until recent years, and fewer still have seen it with their own eyes. Crates stacked along the walls contain handwritten pit notes and setup logs from the 1970s, scribbled in pencil during an era when racing strategy meant reading your competition as much as reading your gauges. These notebooks reveal tire pressures, fuel load decisions, and observations about rival drivers' weaknesses that Petty studied before every race. One corner holds a custom-built race simulator from the 1980s, an analog beast with no screens or digital displays, just mechanical resistance that let Petty visualize laps and train his instincts before technology made such tools common. Early NASCAR trophies and plaques sit buried under tarps and shelves, many unseen publicly for decades, kept not for display, but as personal reminders of what each victory meant. The motorsport industry today treats trophies as branding opportunities, but Petty views them differently, as chapters in a story only he fully understands. Behind a narrow passage at the back of the garage sits what insiders call the vault, a small unmarked room that almost nobody enters. Former Petty Enterprises employees whisper about what this room contains, though few have actually stood inside it. One wall reportedly holds the battered frame from Petty's devastating crash at Pocono Raceway in 1980, left exactly as recovery crews pulled it from the wreckage. That crash nearly ended his life and serves as a permanent reminder of how fragile survival becomes when you're pushing machines to their absolute limits. Another section contains boxes of unopened fan letters from the 1960s and 70s, many from children, veterans, and aspiring racers who poured their hearts into handwritten notes that Petty couldn't bear to discard but never found time to answer. Items from rival drivers also occupy this space, particularly memorabilia connected to Dale Earnhardt Sr., including a helmet sticker and a signed program from just weeks before Earnhardt's fatal crash in 2001. These weren't collected as trophies, but kept as signs of mutual respect between two men who understood the true cost of racing greatness better than fans ever could. Family members say Petty visits this room alone sometimes, staying for hours without speaking, surrounded by objects that carry more emotional weight than monetary value. The financial worth of everything in this garage staggers the imagination, with the Superbird alone commanding over $1.5 million at auction, and the 1957 Oldsmobile considered priceless for what it represents rather than what it's worth. Add the handwritten pit notes, custom steering wheels, prototype parts never mass-produced, early championship trophies, race suits, original crew jackets, and personalized gifts from other racing greats, and the total collection could easily exceed $10 million. Museums have offered to showcase these artifacts, private collectors have made substantial offers, and sports history institutions have reached out repeatedly, but Petty turns them all down because he doesn't view these items as assets or investments. His own words explain it best when he said these aren't trophies, they're pieces of him, memories frozen in time that remind him of close calls, miraculous wins, and the quiet moments between races when doubt crept in. This garage serves as Petty's sanctuary, a place to revisit his legacy carefully and personally, rather than celebrating it for crowds. When asked why he keeps so much private, instead of putting it on public display, Petty answered that some stories aren't for crowds, they're for the people who lived them. His son Kyle Petty and grandson Thad Moffitt, both racers themselves, spend time in this space learning lessons that can't be taught through speeches or highlight reels. They sit among old tires and rusting equipment, absorbing what it meant to build a championship legacy in stock car racing during an era when every victory came at tremendous physical and emotional cost. Some artifacts may eventually make their way to the Petty Museum where fans can appreciate them, but others will never leave this room because they belong to family, not to the world. The choice to guard this collection reveals something profound about how Petty views legacy itself. Most sports legends reduce their careers to highlight reels and magazine covers, but Petty preserved his memories with all their grit, pain, and glory intact. Every fire suit still carries sweat from brutal race days at Talladega. Every steering wheel shows gouges from tense finishes at Martinsville. And even the concrete floors seem to whisper stories through gasoline stains that never fully washed away. One corner holds a seatbelt cut from a car after a brutal crash, saved not as a souvenir but as a reminder that survival sometimes comes down to fractions of seconds and inches. In a tool chest drawer sits a wrench with the initials LP etched into the handle, worn so smooth from use that the letters have started fading. Lee Petty's wrench, his father's tool, kept close not just to honor memory, but to hold on to it physically. Petty's public legacy lives loud through roaring engines and screaming fans and victory celebrations, but his real legacy exists in silence. In this garage where cameras never roll and interviews never happen, he spent his life not just building a championship reputation in motorsport, but protecting the truth behind that reputation, which explains why the garage stays closed to the public and why the vault room stays locked. This isn't secrecy for its own sake, but sacredness, an understanding that certain meanings can't be packaged or polished for display because they belong to the people who were actually there, who held the wrenches and carried the weight and felt their hearts break when races didn't go their way. The garage exists for family, for Kyle and Thad and the next generation, who won't just race under the Petty name but inherit everything it cost to build that name into something that matters beyond trophies. Today's world turns legacy into branding and polishes sports history until it loses all real meaning. But Richard Petty chose something different. He locked this garage not to hide it, but to protect it, understanding that legends fade when they become entertainment, but endure when they're guarded like memory instead of monetized like merchandise. Petty could have sold the Superbird, auctioned the tools, filmed documentaries inside the garage, but he chose something quieter and more lasting. A door closed and a light left off, and a life remembered through presence rather than applause. The next time his name comes up, think not just of the wins or the hat or the number 43 automobile, but of what lies behind that garage door in Level Cross, the place where the king still walks and remembers and whispers to the machines that carried him into legend. He didn't just leave behind a legacy and championship trophies and museum displays. He built a garage where it still lives, quietly and powerfully, forever protected from the world that wants to turn everything into spectacle. For some racers, the story ends at the checkered flag. But for Richard Petty, the real story began when the track went silent and he finally had time to understand what all those years of speed had actually meant.